Watson woes crushing Cleveland. Dorsey wasn't Ken-uff. Diggs drama digging deeper. We've got all that and more. I'm Jason Fitz, and it is time for Inside Coverage. You guys know the crew well at this point. Yahoo Sports senior NFL reporters Charles Robinson, Jori Epstein. I'm Jason Fitz. And look, we start this show right away with huge breaking news that came in today across the NFL news networks. We had no idea. I didn't know this was going to be coming this morning, but we get this. Deshaun Watson, season-ending shoulder surgery on a fracture in his throwing shoulder. This is huge news, obviously, for the Browns as they try and figure out how to navigate the rest of this season. But C-Rob, I think this raises a bunch of questions, and I know obviously you've been on the phone all day trying to figure out the where's, the how's, the why's. Like, how did we get to this point? I mean, right now, what's the latest that you know in Cleveland?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've already been told by the general manager, the head coach, basically Deshaun Watson went in for an MRI on his ankle. They did another on his shoulder, different shoulder issue than earlier in the season. And obviously they come to find out that it's a season-ending surgery that's going to be required now on the shoulder. At this point, everybody knows the news. Okay, he's out for the rest of the season. I think part of what is being debated in Cleveland right now is Dorian Thompson-Robinson is the backup quarterback, rookie, right? Going to start against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And everyone is clutching pearls, white knuckling. I mean, why aren't you more prepared for this? How could you do this? How could you take a roster that was built for a Super Bowl window, a defense that is Super Bowl worthy, and get into a situation where you're now leaning on a rookie quarterback when you had Joshua Dobbs, who is in Minnesota, has played 2 games. He played 2 games in 12 days, looked exquisite, and was loved inside the Cleveland organization. It's a good question. And I will say this. This is my opinion. I will say I am basing this opinion on conversations that I had this morning. A lot is going to be directed at general manager Andrew Berry. Personally, I think that Joshua Dobbs not being on the roster, being dealt for a draft pick to the Arizona Cardinals in the preseason, had more to do with chief strategist Paul DePodesta than it did Andrew Berry. And I am basing that opinion on, again, conversations I have had with people orbiting that trade, people who know Andrew Berry, who know Paul DePodesta, and essentially what was posed to me is, why would a general manager who's in the building every single day, who's as close to Kevin Stefanski and that coaching staff, why would he deal away a backup quarterback who is superb insurance for starter Deshaun Watson, knowing that the coaching staff really, really, really like Joshua Dobbs? Why would Andrew Berry then just decide, I'm going to roll the dice, I'm going to risk it all for a late round draft pick and move off of Joshua Dobbs? Again, this is my opinion, but based on the conversations I had this morning, I do think that the lack of an experienced backup who the staff had quite a bit of affection for is now in Minnesota, starting in the place of Kirk Cousins and doing it very well, and possibly headed for an offseason where he is going to be a coveted free agent if this continues with the Vikings. So at least in that respect, it cleans up. I don't want to say it cleans up. It poses an angle that maybe people aren't considering about why Cleveland is sort of in this mess right now.
Sierra, but I think that begs the question, why would Paul DePodesta want that?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't have an answer for that, except to say that I've always felt this way. So it's not invented this morning. Okay. It's not something that I arrived at this morning. It's hard for me to understand the way that the organization is structured, where you have a chief strategist again. And I know it's the new world. You don't have to be on site all the time. But again, if you have a chief strategist who is intimately involved in all the moves that you make as an organization, who is very, very close to owner Jimmy Haslam, I feel like you should be in that building every day. I feel like you should be on site. You should live near Berea. Okay. Like
where does he live for our listeners who don't know?
West Coast. Okay. He's a West Coast guy. He's lived, I believe he's still making his residence in I believe it's California. I am not a fan of someone who has a significant amount of power in an organization living so far from that organization, not being a absolute daily presence on the ground in the building. I do think that is important. I don't know. I feel like there sometimes is a disconnect in decisions. Now, again, this is my opinion. I'm going to state that again. I can't repeat that enough times here. This is for a few years of kind of looking at that organization from the outside, talking to people who come out of it, talking to people who do trades with the Cleveland Browns. I think Joshua Dobbs is not there today, and it has less to do with the general manager than the chief strategist. That's just my opinion.
But that also creates this weird dynamic. And I think, this happens sometimes, not just for the Browns, but other organizations. But you've got to have a clear concept of whose head rolls when a mistake is made. And anytime you don't, I think that means, and I don't care if we're talking about a restaurant, I don't care if we're talking about Yahoo, I don't care if we're talking about a football team. Like, you got to be able to walk in the building and say, this is a problem, here's who's accountable for that problem. What you're describing to me is such a fail in an organizational concept where you can have somebody that's essentially being forced to execute somebody else. Because the questions that are going to be asked today, rightfully so, is, all right, should Andrew Berry be on the hot seat? Like, that's a fair question, I think, for a lot of people that don't know the structure of the organization well. They're going to come in and say, you don't have jobs. The organization itself has a massive contract they're now shouldered with for Deshaun Watson. Like, these are the things that usually a GM would be, on the hot seat for. So what you're describing is organizational dysfunction, because if I can't even point the picture at who should be held accountable, there's a problem.
Well, you say organizational dysfunction, it's ownership dysfunction. Okay,
I was just going to get there.
That's it. I mean, and Jori, you can speak to this. The organization is set up the way it's set up because ownership has set it up that way. Okay, and classically, I think well-run organizations you have an owner, you have a general manager, you have a head coach. Those are the three people that are typically involved in decisions. Now, maybe they report, sometimes there are head coaches and general managers who report to the owners separately. Sometimes the head coach reports to the general manager, who reports to the owner, and it's a more linear process. But go ahead, Jori. I mean, to me, this is... It's ownership dysfunction to me, and it's funny because I don't think anyone's going to point at Haslam and go, well, geez, maybe the owner's the reason why we got some problems at quarterback right now.
Right. The problem with ownership dysfunction is that it ain't changing unless you're Dan Snyder, and so it's not really a solution because it's not an option. But I think it really is relevant for all of this, because you're saying like DePodesta had this power, and it's like, well, why would he want this? Well, also, why would he have the power to do that? Ownership. Well, I know C-Rob, you and I have both had a lot of conversations with people in the Cleveland Browns organization about the trade for Deshaun Watson from the beginning, and whose idea it was to give him this fully guaranteed contract that was so unlike what NFL history had required, and also to go after him when there was a lot of off-field questions. There remain a lot of off-field questions, even if the climate is a little different surrounding them. And oh, by the way, to give up the draft picks. And I think all of this comes back to, we keep hearing this is what Haslam wanted. And then you have the question of, if this is what Haslam wants and it's not working, someone's probably going to have a job on the line, whether this year or next, because of it. Is that the general manager? Is that the head coach, or both? And is that something that other NFL organizations that are run with less dysfunction will look at them and say, like, we don't think these guys made the decision. They did the best they could to temper the ownership decision. We're still interested in them for a potential opportunity, even though it didn't work out. What do you think?
It's a mistake that hangs on the entire organization. Okay. Even though I'm pointing the finger at ownership, even though I'm pointing a finger, in my opinion, again, at Paul DePodesta, Andrew Berry shares in it. He's the general manager. Okay. They're all, everybody today takes the L on this. Kevin Stefanski, the head coach, takes the L. And I think most well-run organizations, especially when they have a setup where they feel like we have a Super Bowl contending team, we want to make sure that we have insurance at the quarterback position, because there is one thing that undermines a Super Bowl window quickly. That is when you don't have a quarterback available. And, again, on this podcast, going to end up talking about the Jets, going to end up talking about the Browns being in that seat. I would look at, I'll give you an example, the San Francisco 49ers. There's a reason why the 49ers went out and got Sam Darnold. There's a reason why they chose him over Trey Lance. And it was because they knew, look, there's a chance that this doesn't all work out with Brock Purdy's health. maybe we lose him. We're going to have an experienced backup who has started games in the NFL, who has had at least some element of success, whether it's a small window or large. And Sam Darnold brought that to the table. And when they had to make the decision going into this season, do we want to pull the plug on Trey Lance? Man, that's going to look really bad from an optics standpoint. They made the decision. And they looked bad pulling the plug on a player that they dealt a boatload of draft picks for. And they end up choosing, of all people, Sam Darnold, who, okay, he's been run out of a couple of different organizations, has not had a great amount of success, but he is experienced. He has had a window of success. And they know if we have to lean on him for, again, a small window of time, or maybe a large window of time, we have an outside team that's built for it, and they feel good about it. With the Jets, I probably can't. I mean, I don't know. You don't feel good really with what's going on here. It's been a struggle. With the Browns now, I don't know how you can feel good about this situation with a rookie who's going to go face the Steelers and a remainder of a schedule where this is definitely a Super Bowl caliber team surrounding him. And now the Achilles is clearly the fact that they don't have an experienced quarterback.
I will at least give a little bit of hope here. Like, I think there's a couple different angles and conversations that I have here about Deshaun. We're going to spend a lot of today's show about this because it's so significant. If I'm a Browns fan, my hope is that, frankly, yes, this is less than ideal for your quarterback situation, but that defense, that running game is good. You do have some weapons that can help mitigate the disaster of it. You managed to win 2 out of 3 when you had PJ Walker back there, right? I do think that there is some element, if you're a Browns fan, where you can look at it and say, okay, this year, maybe, because I mean, let's be real. When I was watching football on Monday night and they brought up the in the hunt column, we're not talking about a bunch of great quarterbacks in the hunt right now. So there are fatal flaws to so many teams in the AFC. I don't know that all hope is lost for the Browns still being a playoff caliber team because there's just a dumpster fire of quarterback play in the AFC this year.
Yeah, I mean, but Fitz, again, you said playoff caliber team. That's fine. But it's a Super Bowl caliber defense.
Okay, that's fair.
It's
yeah.
really, really hard to grapple with when you're a coaching staff, for example, and you're sitting there and you're going, our jobs are on the line. This is a season of measurement for Kevin Stefanski. We knew that coming into this. Probably a season of measurement for Andrew Berry when this started out as well, right? I mean, they needed to have some success. They needed to have a lot of that success predicated on Watson because of the bet that was made on him with the contract and the picks. And I mean, what was the record with Watson on the field? I think they were 5-1. That's off the top of my head. I believe that staff was 5-1 with Watson on the field, right? Starting for them, reasonably healthy. And now you're taking that away from not just the coaching staff, but you're taking that away from the defense. You're taking that away from the front office after the trade deadline when there's limited options now available to you. It's very hard to swallow losing a season and, a Super Bowl window. I think that we can say that that's lost now when you have a defense that's built for it. You have an offense that's pretty dang good. And now it's down the tubes. And by the way, you've gotten 12 games out of Deshaun Watson in 2 years. Is that right? 12? That 5-year fully guaranteed contract. And you've gotten, I believe, 12 games out of him in 2 seasons. Good God.
And see, Rob, I think there's a case to be made that you have, first of all, how genetically predisposed is any player toward injury. But then you also have the situational elements that come up. And to me, every time that Deshaun Watson keeps having these long layoffs from football, he becomes increasingly injury prone. And you could say, oh, that's not his fault. Obviously the fracture isn't his fault, so to say, but this is a guy who took off a lot of time at the end of his Houston tenure. This is a guy who came to Cleveland and had a suspension. This is a guy who this season has already had multiple reasons he's missing it. And so next year in 2024, do you not have to expect that a guy who now has had shoulder surgery, who had a rookie year's injury, that this guy is just going to continue to keep getting hurt? I think it's highly possible.
And this is where we hit abject disaster level for the Browns, because that contract we've all talked about. I know Browns fans are sick of hearing about it, but I pulled it up. I've got it up in front of me on overthecap.com, and they give you some of the numbers. Post June 1st cut, which remember saves you money. So a post June 1st cut of Deshaun Watson. Not that I'm saying that's inevitable, but I'm just saying that even if they decided that's what they wanted, in 2024, a post June 1st cut would cost $156 million. In 2025, it would cost $110 million. million. In 2026, a 31-year-old Deshaun Watson post June 1st cut still costs $64 million. We're talking about historic numbers. We're talking about if Deshaun Watson retires, if Deshaun Watson were to be traded, if Deshaun Watson were to be cut in the next 2 years, it takes their entire salary cap. Like, they can't even have other players. So there's nothing they can do. The problem here isn't just that they're losing a Super Bowl season. The problem here is that the Browns now have to look in the mirror and realize that they went out there and willingly signed somebody that made fans uncomfortable, that made many people look at it and say, you're giving this guy the money. Signed somebody that, frankly, has acted, according to multiple reports and according to the NFL, like a wild piece of shit. They gave him this much money, and now he can't stay healthy on the field. So you've given a bad person, at least at one point in his life, a ton of money, and he can't even get on the field. Like, this is the total disaster for the Browns.
Yeah, and if you listen to Andrew Berry talking this week, I mean, he confirmed, the Browns reporters asked him, is there any way out of this contract? Are there any loopholes if, let's say, he doesn't recover from the shoulder surgery? And it's like, no, his contract is guaranteed for skill, injury, and cap. Like, they are paying him this money. And that's why Andrew Berry has little choice but to get up there on a day like today and say, we believe in Deshaun. We feel good about our quarterback position. Like, what else can you do? Like, you've got to convince ownership that this is still the right decision.
But here's the thing. I don't even have a problem now at this point with if Barry gets up there and he says, I'm fine with that. Again, they were 5-1 with Deshaun this season, right? Like, it's not terrible. It's great. Like, and you can point to the success for the defense. You can point to everything else but Deshaun. You were still 5-1, and there were moments where you're like, okay, he looks like he's getting it together. Like, it feels like this might be fine. It might all work out. It's just, you got to protect yourself on the downside. You have to protect yourself. You just do. And it's inexplicable to me that not only were you not really protected when this happened, it was at the loss of someone that was liked in the building. It was a good player. Like, I think if anything, it's funny because
very well liked in the building.
Yeah, I mean, like, it just doesn't. You're like, what the hell? You want to have an experienced backup quarterback who's really good at getting your starter prepared, who's really good in the meeting room, who's smart, who's talented, who actually brings something to the table. It's funny. The worst thing I've heard about Joshua Dobbs, and Jori and I both worked on pieces on Dobbs, all these calls out and stuff. Literally, the worst thing I've heard about Dobbs is that sometimes he doesn't practice well. Like, sometimes not super accurate on the practice field. But then when the lights come on and he goes out there,
his instincts are insane.
Yeah, like, it's for whatever reason, and it's weird. It's a weird dynamic, and it's a dynamic that I think makes staffs uncomfortable. Is that you want someone to practice really well and then play really well. You don't want to sit there and watch somebody in practice and go, man, like, he's seems a little off, but geez, he shows up on Sunday. like as Alan and I was, it's practice, not a game, practice. But that's the worst thing I have heard about him. Otherwise, it's straight A's across the board, and he's shown it to you when it matters most. So it's inexplicable to me. It would be a lot easier to understand if I had heard the staff thought, well, geez, he was a problem. Well, geez, he was, undercutting Deshaun. Well, geez, he wanted to be the starter. So there was always this friction and, meetings. It was none of that. So and again, I will just go back to when you talk to people who understand the organization, when you talk to people who understand Andrew Berry, when understand Paul DePodesta, Haslam, all these different things, not one of them can go, yeah, makes a lot of sense that the GM, who is so in tune with the head coach, that's so in tune with the coaching staff, that's so in tune with everything that's going on a daily basis in that building, was the one who decided, go ahead and not keep this guy around. And we'll risk all this hard work we've done, everything we've gotten in line for this. We'll risk it despite what I'm on a daily basis experiencing inside the franchise. It just makes no sense to me.
But I think too, and you guys know so much about the inner workings of the league, this speaks to one of the biggest problems bad teams have. And I'm not saying the Browns are a bad team, but let's say dysfunctional organizations have. Let me say it that way. Ownership is where a lot of this is coming back to. Like, we're putting it at the feet of the organizational structure that was developed. What do you do when your favorite football team, as a fan, is owned by somebody that's simply not a great owner? Because, like, I hear fans all the time say, well, make them sell the team, things like that. And I constantly remind the world that that's just not the way the world works. If your favorite restaurant stops serving good food, you don't get to walk into the owner, slap them in the face and be like, you got to sell this restaurant. Like, the world doesn't work that way, right? Like, so all you can do is just sit there and suffer. But these are the little nuances when you talk about organizational structure that speak to dysfunction that becomes hard. Like, okay, you can rebuild, you can put everybody on the hot seat. We can go out, we can fire everybody. Fire for the contracts, fire for the coaching, fire for the analytics, fire for everything. The same person is going to be making the hiring decisions that built a structure that doesn't work at this point, that creates these sorts of issues. So, like, that's the maddening definition of insanity out of this whole process, is that if we're saying that because of the structure created by Haslam, that's part of the reason they're in the situation they're in, guess what? It ain't going to change. He's still going to create the next structure for whoever comes in the building next. So it becomes maddening.
The other question I want to ask you guys is that it's just been this roller coaster of Deshaun Watson feelings recently. Like, I know, C-Rob, you wrote a piece a few weeks ago about, like, is this getting even worse for the Browns than they intended? Now there's questions about whether Deshaun Watson likes playing football, whether he cares about it. He's got the injuries, all of these questions. Then we go to this past weekend. The Browns come back to beat the Ravens, and you have sort of, he's not playing well at the beginning. He starts off by throwing a pick six at the very beginning of the game, but then in the first half, Deshaun Watson against the Ravens, 6 of 20, 79 yards, interception, and he rushes 5 times for 19 yards. Second half, 14 of 14, 134 yards, touchdown. They score 24 points after scoring 9 points in the first half. How much did that second half that really showed people, like, potential ceiling, what Deshaun Watson maybe still can't do, and I guess in retrospect was doing with a fractured shoulder, how much is that going to buy Deshaun Watson some grace with ownership and with leadership? Is it going to be able to be something that Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski can point to and be like, look, when this guy's healthy, as you said, C-Rob, 5-1, as you saw in his last performance, second half, perfect throwing, touchdown, making the plays when you need, winning a comeback against the Ravens, who are really probably like one of the measuring sticks that are, like, very key for the Browns. Like, how much is that half going to play into what we see going forward?
Irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Fitz already laid it out. It's irrelevant. The money makes it irrelevant. But he doesn't have to care about grace. He doesn't have to care about it. He's getting paid. He's not going anywhere. They're married to him. That's it. It's done. Over. It doesn't. What the fans think doesn't mean. What I think doesn't mean. You paid the money out. He's locked in. He's the guy. And it falls in the same category as every other reason you questioned the Browns doing what they were doing, connecting themselves with Watson. Prior to this, it does not, it all goes out the window. The second you deal for him and you pay that money, he is yours. The problems are yours. Whatever upside there is yours. It's all yours. And so it doesn't, grace cares about grace at this point. It's the money. It's the zeros. Like, it's the bank account. The direct deposit hits. That's it. So if you're Stefanski, if you're Andrew, if you're Jimmy Haslam, whoever you are, you just have to make this the best you can make it, whether that's building the roster around him, whether that's supporting him publicly, whether it's having the quarterback in the meeting room backing him up that he wants, all these different facets. You have to do everything you can just to make it work once you make that commitment. So, I mean, people can criticize him, and yell at Jimmy and yell at Andrew and yell at Paul DePodesta and everybody else and be pissed off about it. That's fine. But that's just wasted oxygen at this point. It does not change the reality that he is yours, regardless of how anyone feels about him or how he plays.
Okay, so I'll agree with you on half of that, which is that it is irrelevant for Deshaun Watson's immediate future, how he played in that first half. But it is not irrelevant for Andrew Berry's future. It is not irrelevant for Kevin Stefanski's future. So how much do you think that they will be able to point to that half as one of the reasons why they should still be believed in for this acquisition? And how much do you think Jimmy Haslam will buy that? Okay,
so that's a question of how much grace does it buy Andrew Berry? Is that what you were asking me? Maybe. Okay. So, I mean, in terms of,
I was asking for all of them. And I think you make a good point that it's not relevant for the quarterback.
I'll let you answer that 1 second. Just let me inject this one thing. Cleveland's 6-3 right now. For all of the questions that we have about the way some of it is,
feel like it, right?
Cleveland is 6-3. So I'm just pointing that, like, it would take an abject disaster for this team not to finish with 9 wins. At least they could do even better than this. So, like, that's part of why I'll let you answer it, C-Rob. I'm just reminding everybody, Cleveland is 6-3 right now.
And they're 6-3 without their starting quarterback for some of those games.
That half is going to fade so fast. I mean, it's not even going to fade. It's gone, right? Like, it's already gone. The fan base is like right now in Cleveland Cleveland radio is overwhelmed with Browns fans who are just in absolute despair. Like, are you serious? Like, really, this is what we're dealing. So I don't think I think what buys Kevin Stefanski grace at this point, what buys Andrew Berry grace at this point is how you finish. Because right now, everybody's focused on why were you not more prepared at the backup quarterback spot for something like this to potentially happen. And then Andrew Berry steps up there, Kevin Stefanski steps up there, and they say, look, we have confidence in the quarterbacks that we have in the room. We feel like we're okay with this. We're going to move forward with what we got. Let's see what the results are. Because if you go winless from here on out, somebody's getting fired. If you go from 6-3 and you're 7-10, somebody's getting fired. Like,
is Paul Podesta an option here, or is ownership too believing in him to make him an option?
I don't think so. I think the one guy who I think is definitely not getting fired is Paul. That's my opinion.
I'm still like, look at me. I'm over here being poly positive, beacon of light. This is rare for me in this world. They got Pittsburgh coming this week, they lost to Pittsburgh earlier this year. I get that. Kenny Pickett's a beatable quarterback. That's fine. Then they have Denver. Then they have the Rams, Jacksonville, tough. Then they have Chicago, not tough. Houston, tough. The Jets, not tough unless they suddenly have a new quarterback by then. Like, there are still 4 or 5 easily winnable games. Like, I think that's the one part of this. Like, I with that defense and their ability to run the ball the way they've run the ball throughout the course of this year, I don't know. Like, I still think that they can turn around and win 4 or 5 more. Like, this is still a double-digit win team to me. I think the Browns still win 10 games.
I think there can't be any more injuries at the right. The offensive line, you can't have injuries on the line from here on out. Running back spot, you can't have injuries from here on out. They're just way too vital for, as you said, holding up the facet of the team that is going to be complementary to that defense, which is obviously running the football. So, I mean, yeah, I'm not saying all is lost. I'm just saying that if it does not go well, I do not see Jimmy Haslam sitting there and just shrugging and going, well, it is what it is. We're going to go ahead and move on into 2024 and no heads are going to roll or whatever. Now, if he did, I'd be curious to see how the season played out. There'd have to be something to it. Like, why? Because I don't expect that Haslam's just going to be blindly loyal at this stage, especially knowing that this season was going to be a measurement for Kevin Stefanski. It was going to be a measurement of sorts for Andrew Berry. I don't know. It's going to be real interesting to see, what happens the remainder of the season, how the fan base feels about it, and how Haslam reacts to it, because I do think outward optics are going to matter in this one.
And I would just remind everybody one more time, the salary cap situation is so dire for him. They can't even draft a quarterback in the first round. There's no way they can eat a first-round quarterback salary on top of Deshaun for the next 3-4 years. So, like, ain't nothing they can do about it. Like, this isn't one of those, we can draft somebody and just wait till that person plays. Like, they are stuck in this situation, so they got to hope he gets healthy. Let's also mention that's not the only sort of hot seat conversation happening, not because of injury, but because of poor play at this point. Big news this week that would have been a lead story if it weren't for Deshaun Watson is that the Bills have fired Ken Dorsey, their offensive coordinator, which Jori didn't get the joke at the beginning, but that's why I said Dorsey wasn't Ken-uff. It's a Barbie reference, Jori. It was a good movie, all right, but Ken Dorsey gets fired, and there's this moment of like, what the hell? Like, I don't know. Y'all tell me, but I guess I expected this ascension this year of Josh Allen would get back to being the Josh Allen we're used to seeing, and everything would be fine. He did not. Now Ken Dorsey's gone, and all of a sudden, if I'm a Bills fan, I'm looking around and see Rob, and I am panicked over the way this season is going.
It's weird because when you look at the loss to the Broncos, and if you just don't have 12 men on the field, right, and you kick a field goal, your coordinator doesn't get fired. I don't think he gets fired, which is completely insane to think that, like, an extra defender, which is coaching, you got to make sure you got 11 instead of 12 on the field, easily solvable. Maybe the defensive coordinator, you don't throw zero blitz at Russell Wilson when he throws the pop fly and gets the pass interference penalty. Maybe don't throw zero blitz at Russ in that situation. Dorsey didn't have anything to do with either of those situations, right? And if the field goal is missed, then he has a job this week and everybody's moving on about, there's concern, but hey, they'll clean it up, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. It was weird. In a way, I feel like you had Sean McDermott feeling like he had to do something, to change. And the way he talked about changing the energy, and it just felt like there was something off. And I ended up writing, it's like, there's something broken about that offense. There's something broken about this team. I still think it goes back to the playoff collapse against Kansas City. I don't think they've ever been fully right, and they've certainly not been what they were going into that game. I think the turnovers are frustrating. 5.5 years of Josh Allen, he has like 100 plus turnovers in 5.5 years. I wish I had the number right in front of me, but it's like 100 plus. It's crazy. When you look at the interceptions and the fumble losses, it's an insane number of turnovers in 5.5 years. And it's insane that you're now dealing with this still with a quarterback who should be in his prime, should be absolutely in the wheelhouse of MVP level seasons. And you're talking about anticipation, right? You're talking about confidence. That's what McDermott talked about after Dorsey is fired, and he's talking about Allen. He's talking about being able to anticipate things as a quarterback, to have confidence. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, he's 27. Like, he's been a starter for years. You should not be talking about that stuff with Josh Allen. He's supposed to be an MVP level starter. And I just think it was McDermott feeling like he had to make some kind of change, maybe to rattle Josh Allen, because that's the guy. You're obviously not changing from Josh Allen. The changeable piece here is the OC, or maybe the quarterback's coach, or somebody, whoever's most directly tied to his performance in that room. So that ends up being Dorsey. It's crazy to me to go back to that game when they lost to Kansas, how we felt about the Bills, right? We were like, oh my God, it's their time. This is it. They are the bully that's going to, knock off Kansas City. And that's going to be such a great rivalry all these years going forward. No. Now it feels, they're 5-5 and maybe they write it and they're fine. Maybe they go win a Super Bowl this year. But to me, it feels closer to coming undone than getting fixed, especially when you have the Stephon Diggs situation where you still aren't fully sure how he feels about Josh Allen, and his brother is not helping when he goes on social media and starts talking about Josh Allen's success really beginning when Stephon Diggs got there. He didn't do the situation any help. If I wish Stephon Diggs would be like, let's just not talk about this publicly. Maybe I do have some beefs here. Let's go ahead and keep that off social media right now.
But Stephon Diggs so many times in the last 8 months, I don't know. Yeah, he airs things publicly. Trayvon jumps on the bandwagon, whether that's a reporter saying something that I don't think was controversial, and Stephon Diggs being like, I'm a human. Why aren't you treating me like one? And it's like, I don't know. Maybe why aren't you treating other people like one? And then you have this stuff going on with him during OTAs. Now you've got this. I just think if you got that coming unraveled at any moment, you have Leslie Frazier, the defensive coordinator, leaving after last season, and now you have the offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, out. It's like, okay, that's two coordinators. Like, how much can Sean McDermott continue to take on, even if he's a very good coach? And I think that you're playing the Jets this week, which already beat you once, and that wasn't great for morale to start your season. And then, by the way, Zach Wilson has a lot of struggles, as we'll discuss on this podcast, but they also have a really good defense that you don't really want to see when you're offensively struggling in this game. And I think we should have some empathy in terms of the timeline from 13 seconds left in the playoffs until now, because Damar Hamlin really shook this organization. And Buffalo as a city, from the shooting to some of the storms, there's a lot that the city went through last year that I think kind of, I don't want to say destabilized because that feels a little bit harsh, but I do think it really challenged the Bills as an organization physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically last year. But I think at some point, I agree with you that on the field product definitely looks far closer to coming unraveled than it does the window's still open.
I think what you said there, though, is a really strong point when it comes to what brings either galvanizes the locker room or rips them apart. Sometimes when you go through, whether it's cultural events or whether it's something local or whether it's something in the locker room, it can bring everybody together, and it becomes the thing that, we plant the flag and we get this great right bond. But it can also be the thing that sort of creates unintended fracture all over the place. The question becomes here, who's the calming force in this locker room, right? Like, because if we're hearing this from Diggs and like Josh Allen's just been kind of quiet about all of it, and it seems like McDermott's not really like doing anything to change this. Like, it just feels like the whole thing is a pot ready to boil over, and I don't know who comes in and just says, hey, we can calm these seas. Everything's going to be just fine. And without that right now, it feels like every week is just closer and closer to an eruption, C-Rob.
Sometimes firings, they kick something into gear. Sometimes there is a change. And as McDermott put it when he talked about like kind of changing the energy or the focus around the offensive unit, if that does happen, then okay, then, the tension, as you put it, the pot being ready to boil over, that calms and wins. We know it. We've all covered sports here for a long time. Winning is an amazing remedy for everything. It's so easy to gloss over everything if you can just win football games. We'll see it in Cleveland moving forward. It'll help a lot. In Buffalo, it'll help a lot. It would with the Jets if they could get some of those wins. I guess to me, when I look at Allen and I think about the turnovers, my question is like, functionally, what is happening with him? Because all the things that Buffalo as a community has gone through, certainly that weighs on the team. But on any given snap, Josh isn't throwing an interception because of that. He's not fumbling a football because of that.
That's a very fair point. That's a very fair point.
So, I mean,
I view that more as relative to going back from 13 seconds to here than specifically the on-field issues.
I get it. I mean, it's not clearly that's not just the one thing that's happened with this organization and, one thing that they've thought about over an expansive time. I guess for me, when I go back to the Kansas City game, I just think the trajectory of the team felt like it changed so much from there to now when I think about how they carried themselves, who Josh Allen was as a player. Like if you watch that press conference after the Denver loss, I focused on him saying it sucks, right? And it's funny because I'm like, man, I know I've heard this guy say this before. Like I've heard him say it sucks so many times. And I'm like, is it just recent in my mind? So I literally sat down. I'm like, let me Google it sucks. And the word coming out of Josh Allen's mouth. So like a ton of that pops up going all the way back to him being drafted where it's always bad. I mean, and he falls on that phrase when it's something really that's happening. And the fact that we're there right now with these Bills who are supposed to be built for this moment, who are supposed to be 8-2, 9-1, a shoo-in for the AFC title game, a gargantuan Super Bowl favorite, and they just aren't. And then when I watch that press conference and I look at Allen, I'm like, this guy is like, he does not represent at all what he was a couple of years ago. He's not, and I hate to use the word swagger and all that stuff, but it's just like, I see a guy sitting there who looks shell-shocked, who's answering words, like answers are coming out like it's Bill Belichick, like his mumbles, it's a couple of words and a lot of dead air. And people are just like, how are we going to get this guy to talk? And that's the quarterback. That's the centerpiece. That's the star. And he looks completely it looks like a balloon deflating in front of our eyes. And so I don't know, like mentally what's going to change. I don't know how easily that will be changed just by moving out Dorsey and seeing if that changes the energy in the room. I guess McDermott feels like it. Now we'll see. But I'd say this, as you said about Frazier, Dorsey, there's nobody left to move on from. Like it's McDermott now. This is that's a real question. Do either of you believe that McDermott is on the hot seat if this year does not go the way the Bills intended? Like if they're barely in the playoffs or not in the playoffs at all, is Sean McDermott on the hot seat?
It feels to me like there's at least go to next season. Now, hot seat going into next season maybe, but hot seat after this season, that feels a little bit extreme to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Even if they miss the playoffs, I don't know if I think Sean knows, okay, like you're on the clock. We're going to go into next season. Hopefully we can make some tweaks this offseason. We can get the coaching staff smoothed out. We can crawl into Josh's head and reprogram the buttons. And, next season, maybe you can get off to a good start and we'll see where it goes. Now, if you don't, where's the bye week in the schedule? Because that might be where we're making a change in 2024. If what we're seeing now, and let's say this is a descent into the rest of the season, if that's something that continues into 2024, then I don't know where else you would point other than if he can't fire the quarterback, and he can't, it's the head coach, right? I mean, that's it. I said, look, Cleveland, you're not going to fire Watson, right? You're going to fire the head coach. You're going to fire the GM. You're not going to fire the owner. So it's the same situation in Buffalo. Owner's not going anywhere, and quarterback's not going anywhere. You've already talked about moving on from 2 coordinators. At some point, you got to get to McDermott.
And again, let's keep in mind, I know you were asking more about after the season, but in terms of a mid-season firing for Sean McDermott this year, which would be premature, the defensive coordinator was out in the offseason and the offensive coordinator was just out. So who is your interim coach and what is your structure? You keep getting rid of everyone.
Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening this year. And I'm not sure anything should happen. I think some years, the football gods shine on you and some years they don't. They got things to fix in Buffalo, but I don't know that you just totally rebuild everything because of it.
Do they have an Antonio Pierce? I mean, is there somebody on the roster that is, Buffalo through and through and can energize? Like who was breaking tables in half when they were kids growing up?
Suddenly Cornelius Bennett is like standing on the sideline ready to become a head coach. Okay, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
But I do want to ask, let's say 2024 doesn't go well for the Giants or Bills. Is there any chance Brian Daboll goes back to Buffalo as the head coach?
Oh, as the head coach?
As the head coach? I like Brian Daboll to become the next Josh McDaniels. Every few years, he just walks back in and takes over the offensive coordinator job. He comes back and he's like, Mom, Dad, I'm back. I'm moving back in for a little while. I'm going to see if I can get this thing worked out. Maybe I'll stay with you guys for a while. That's the new Daboll for me.
If we truly believe that he is the reason why Josh Allen reached the heights that he reached when Daboll was there, and there is this theory, I guess. I mean, I don't really know how provable it is. It's funny because when you look at the numbers between Daboll and you look at Dorsey, the touchdowns are different, but like the third down percentage, some of these other things are pretty similar, right? But it's the turnovers, right? It's the how much are you scoring? Like, why is scoring down? Why are you having all these problems in the red zone? And then there's this undercurrent of, well, when Daboll was here, he kept Josh in check. Josh has got to kind of be coached hard. And Daboll was the one who, he rooted out the hero ball stuff. The weird thing about that is, though, Josh ran more with Daboll. He was out there doing wild, running around. And like with Dorsey, it was the opposite. Like, he doesn't run much at all under Dorsey. So which is it? Like, I don't think we can look back and go, well, yeah, Josh didn't do as much hero ball stuff. He did. And he ran around and he put himself at risk.
It just worked.
It just worked. Right. That's it. It just kind of went well. So now it's this, and I've fallen into that. I've been the one who said they missed Daboll. I've said it a couple of times this season because I think
Daboll misses them too at this point.
Yeah. That's been pointed out to me.
Yeah. Every time he looks to Daniel Jones now, he just looks over and thinks, what might have been?
Yeah. It's like the meme with the guy and the girl and the guy. And it's like looking back at Josh Allen.
Pop culture, right there. And so I want to make a note that she got a pop culture reference.
So proud of Jori.
November 15th, she's done for the rest of the year. She got her pop culture reference.
Go watch a Barbie movie. All right, Jori, I want to talk to you about Zach Wilson because I'm trying to figure out what to make. Obviously, I just watched my beloved Raiders win. That's fine. It's great. But even I, with a wildly biased eye, looked at this and said, wow, Zach Wilson, not that great. But Robert Saleh disagrees and says he's actually playing pretty well. What do you make, first and foremost, of Saleh and the way that he is handling a very strange situation of being saddled with this quarterback?
Yeah, I wrote about this week, and my big point was, I agree Zach Wilson is not to blame for everything. But Robert Saleh is acting like he's not to blame for anything. And I think everyone should be taking accountability here. And sure, yes, Saleh had his moments where he said, Zach would like the interception back. Zach should play better. But I could not believe that Robert Saleh came out and was like, the people around him need to play better. And it's hard to have a proper assessment of Zach Wilson until they all play better, until they all stop with the penalties. And also, at some point, a quarterback can be part of the solution to the problem when you have 8-9 penalties every single game for 5 games. And so I think that I just start to wonder more and more as Robert Saleh peddles this increasingly like unnuanced take of whether or not Zach Wilson is the quarterback for this team right now, whether Robert Saleh believes what he's saying, whether there's someone else in the building who is saying that you need to keep this quarterback, and then Saleh's in this awkward position of being the public face of that decision, whether or not he's the private supporter of it. And again, I don't think that Zach Wilson could never play in the NFL again as a serviceable and productive starting quarterback. And I also don't think he's done nothing right. But I do think that right now, this offense has continuously failed to meet the mark. And if you have a quarterback who for 36 straight possessions cannot get into the end zone or have anyone in his team get into the end zone, even if it's not him throwing a passing touchdown, you got to do something about it.
Well, especially, I mean, remember the play, his foot barely goes out of bounds at the 4-yard line, and that turns into a field goal. Now, I think there is some truth to what Saleh is saying about, situational awareness of where you take penalties as an offense overall, but there has to be some nuances. It's just what we do so often as a society. Like, Zach Wilson wasn't good and wasn't particularly likable through that process. Now he comes back, and everybody wants to make him so likable that it's like, oh, we're trying to overcorrect. It's like we're overcorrecting in a steer here, like driving a car. And I just don't understand that. Like, there is a valuable need here to just look at who Zach Wilson is for who Zach Wilson is. He missed a bunch of throws in a game against a bad, I don't want to say bad, let's say a decent Raiders defense at best.
Wow,
right?
Did you just call your Raiders bad?
I mean,
cut this stone.
I'm just like, I think Monday when people are like, oh my God, what did Miami do? It's like, well, maybe the Raiders defense just wasn't that like, but I think Zach Wilson had opportunities there and didn't take advantage of them. I don't know exactly what Robert Saleh is supposed to do, but it doesn't feel like protecting him is the answer. There's got to be some honesty in all of this. And now we're in this situation where, Saleh is being asked about Aaron Rodgers and this just isn't going anywhere. And, the headline out that he would allow Rodgers to play, I think requires some nuance because that would require the medical staff clearing him. And I just feel like we're all jumping through all of these Jets hoops. Like, no, Zach Wilson's really a good kid now, and it's going to be fine. And you know what? Aaron Rodgers is going to come back in. Like, can we just let doctors be doctors and okay quarterbacks be okay quarterbacks?
Yeah, no, I have a couple points on that. I would say, firstly, Zach Wilson is being more honest about this than Robert Saleh is being. And I included his quote in the story for that reason, saying, to throw an interception to lose the game sucks. I hate that. I've got to be better for the guys, the team, everybody battling. I've got to be better there. And I just felt like he was more willing to call himself out than the coaches, which you might say that is what you want. But I still think that the coach just like, the other players in the room are adults too, and they're going to start to take you less credibly if you continue to say these things. And then you go to Zach Wilson's passer rating. His passer rating's 30th among eligible quarterbacks. His completion rate is 31st. His touchdown rate is 31st. So trying something like a Tim Boyle, I'm not saying he's going to start lighting up the league Josh Dobbs style, but I do think that you don't have much lower to go in this circumstance. As it relates to Aaron Rodgers, I mean, look, yes, definitely nuance is needed because I think everyone's like, oh, they're just letting Aaron do whatever he wants. Like, Saleh did include the line that once the doctors clear him, it will be up to Aaron. I also think that you don't really want to mess with Aaron Rodgers, particularly in the building. And so Saleh knows better than to be like, no, we're going to protect Aaron from himself. Like, that's not how you deal with someone of his personality and his caliber of play. But I don't think that I necessarily believe that if Rodgers wants to come back, he's going to. And maybe Saleh is also hinging on the fact that Rodgers has said at different points, if we are still in the playoff hunt, I'll come back. But they have to take into consideration the contract that they gave him, and great that he took a pay cut, but still he's a lot of money and a lot of investment both in terms of his contract and in terms of all of his friends that he brought along with him to this New York Jets experience. And so you have to be at this point really thinking for next year and not just saying we really want our fans to get to see Aaron Rodgers throw a touchdown pass and break this touchdownless streak on December 17th. That's not realistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Saleh, it's a win to say we're going to let, of course I'd let Aaron play. Also, I would gladly say that if I knew that the doctors had very little chance of clearing him. What's he going to say? He's not a doctor. The whole Fremulon, not a doctor thing at the end of TV shows. You wouldn't get that reference. You never watch TV. But, I'm just saying, Fremulon, not a doctor. Robert Saleh, not a doctor. We're asking what the Jets would do, but we're asking the wrong people. I mean, because the first thing that's going to happen in this situation is the medical team's going to have to clear Aaron Rodgers. Then Aaron Rodgers and the medical team will go to the organization and say, here's the information we think we should play. Why jump through the hoops to rule anything in or out until you have that information? I just think that's a smart way to do it. the hard part about all of this is that the more Saleh handles things in this way, the more it just doesn't feel authentic or genuine. And, you know, you mentioned earlier sort of the communication and the way other guys in the locker room feel. Well, you can lose a locker room by being a jerk. You can also lose a locker room by being protected by a head coach. Like, I just, his fault or not, if Saleh comes in and treats him with kid gloves, then the rest of that locker room is going to roll their eyes and say, here we go again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert on Russell Wilson's Seattle tenure, but I think there was some element of that there of like the defense didn't want Russ to just be able to like get a free pass for everything when the Legion of Boom was balling out. And I do think that I would say like Saleh maybe would even lose it more quickly in that scenario than Zach Wilson would, because Zach Wilson is saying like, I need to be better. And I do think his relationships in the locker room are vastly better than last year. I mean, they got really bad at the end of last year when his teammates were wearing the Mike effing White shirts. And I've been in the Jets locker room several times this year during the week and on game day. And I do think these guys appreciate who he is, but I also think that both he and them know that he's not ready to be the quarterback. And I think it's interesting because quarterbacks and really any NFL player have to have kind of this like unrealistic confidence of what they can do to go out and put themselves in these situations. I think that's often the case when you're performing, and especially in a game as violent and as counter to human instincts to protect ourselves as football is. But I think that Zach Wilson deep down knows he's not ready for this opportunity, and that's okay. Like, a lot of people aren't. Most of the world cannot do what he's doing right now. He's still like better than almost everyone in the world. But going back to what we've talked about with the Cleveland Browns, there is this element of the defense is ready and the offense is not, and the offense is not getting there. And I don't know how many times you can say, well, the offensive line had all these penalties, because really it was the offensive line had 3 penalties and Zach Wilson had a penalty and your receiver had a penalty and a running back had a penalty and a tight end had 2 penalties. And at some point, part of the cleanliness of the operation falls on the quarterback, because he is the one communicating on the field how everything is going to work in tandem, and often over communicating on the field to make sure that these errors don't happen. So I don't blame him for every penalty, but I do think that that is not something that you should say, well, someone else needed to be better. You can't judge him for that.
Yeah, and I keep thinking, to everything you just said, I keep imagining, like, look, I had the opposite of overprotective parents. But, you know, when you've got the overprotective parent and, like, the kid's, like, trying to make things right at school, and finally they come in, they're like, Mom, stop, you're killing me. Like, I feel like there's this element of Zach Wilson going into coach's office and be like, Coach, stop, you're killing me. Like, I'm trying to win these guys back, and now you're doing this. And, like, just let it go. Let me figure this out. You know, it's New York. You can't.
Yeah, my dad definitely had elements of that. I remember there were times when my brother's basketball coach in high school would keep them like 3-4 hours after school. And my dad's like, these are not kids going to play pro. Like, let them do their homework. Let them get sleep. Let them be humans. Like, yeah, you can practice every day and you can do what you need to do. But like 4 hours is ridiculous, especially when we had a school day that went 8 to 5, just classes. And so, yes, I'm going to have my dad listen to this element of the podcast because you're calling him out, Fitz.
Oh, well, that's good for future relationships. Yeah, there we go. We'll be back tomorrow with Zero Blitz. You can follow us all on social media at Jason Fitz, C-Rob at Charles Robinson, Jori at Jori Epstein. Super simple. All of our names. You know where to find us. Stone doing God's work at SJ Rochelle is our producer behind the glass. Don't forget, you guys can all be a part of celebrating the legacy of Terez Paylor. It's really easy. All you got to do is go to breakingt.com. It's the letter T there. So breaking.t.com/Terez for an all juice tee or hoodie. I have the hoodie. It is wildly soft. And remember, by supporting it, all the proceeds go to Terez Paylor scholarships at Howard and Missouri directly. So it's a great way to continue to support somebody that means so much to all of us that we love so much. Please leave us a 5-star review. Be sure to rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, your enemies, and everybody to hang out with us every single week. We'll be back next Wednesday with more Inside Coverage.